Hi, my name is Winsley, and welcome to my video reacting to the 5th Dev Diary for Age of Wonders 4. This week they covered faction creation, specifically how they created a Dwarven faction for another stream that they just showed off. This was a pretty fun stream. I really enjoyed watching Tom play. He's got a great sense of humor, and I was very impressed that at the end he was able to win that fight. No spoilers for people who want to actually go watch it, but that was pretty cool. I liked seeing all the units in action in that late game fight, as well as the early game fight, and all of the other little things that went into getting there. But I think we'll cover this video first, and then jump into the dev diary. I took some screenshots, and we'll just kind of move chronologically through those. So I did notice at the beginning that they showed off the 8 realm traits menu where you can choose between the 4 different types or a couple miscellaneous traits. It looks like on this one right here they were just picking the presence trait. There's I think presence traits and oh boy, just like general things about what the world could have on it, other than just like the people. Specifically, one was like a lava divide, and one was like a chasm in the planet. So it is interesting that it's not just 4. I thought maybe you only get 4 options that you can slot in there, but it looks like you can take one of each of those like general realm things, as well as up to 4 miscellaneous. So maybe for just 4 traits, maybe even 8. Pretty interesting that you're going to have that much customization. The next thing they went over is actually stuff that is in the dev diary. So we'll talk more about the body traits, the culture, and the society picks once we go back to the dev diary. What I found really interesting next in the stream was going over the summon units. I think this is a pretty interesting summon. The animated armor is pretty tanky for a tier 1 unit. It looks like it has a good amount of armor, resistance, HP, and as well as just like first strike, which I think is a really nice mechanic that was introduced in Age of Wonders Planetfall. I think first strike means that if something's going to melee attack it, it gets to hit back first. And I think that can be counteracted by things like stagger. I think they have different names for it in Age of Wonders 4 here. But it works, I think, more or less the same way. If you can get rid of their ability to retaliate, then they won't have first strike. It's a fun unit. It's a pretty cool unit. I like the idea of all these little summons. Gargoyles sound fun. A little mindless golem sounds pretty fun, although yeah, I just say it's immune to morale things and immunity, so I guess it's similar to mindless. Maybe it can get positive morale, but it can't lose morale the same way a unit with a mind would. I really love the fact that you can actually customize how the individual units look. You could make your doors have really long legs or really short legs. That's a fantastic change. I think that that's going to make the customization process a lot more fun. I'm excited to see like lizard type people with short arms recreating like T-Rexes, or just something that's a little bit silly that maybe wasn't intended that way, but it works out really well for one thematic reason or another. I love that you can trade out the mounts. You can make it so that dwarves no longer ride like typical dwarven units, and same with any other faction that you decide to build. That's, I think, a really easy thing to miss, and I'm really glad they highlighted that in the stream today. They were also playing a champion and not a wizard, which is probably what I'm going to be doing in most of my games. I love the idea that you're going to have the ability to get more experience on your good guy units, meaning you don't have to take quite as many fights to stay viable, and that is just going to have a slightly different play style. Like this one's going to be better at getting gold, and wizards are going to be better at getting mana, which means that when you have more gold, you're probably going to have more units that can deal physical damage, and they can get countered really well by wizards. And wizards are going to have a lot of magical damage, and they'll be countered by champions, and they'll just kind of struggle at fighting each other. Like champions will struggle at fighting other champions, and wizards will struggle a little bit with fighting other wizards. But that sounds like a fun little balancing mechanic. I also noticed here that you get more casting points as a wizard, and something called overcharged, which sounds pretty pretty good. It sounds like maybe wizards are going to be slightly better in person, but if you go the champion route, then your other units might be able to hold the line better without necessarily your hero being there. So you can maybe have a wider empire if you go the good guy route. And I love that idea because typically the villains that go conquering everything, they typically have wider nations. So I think it's kind of like flipping expectations a little bit on their head in a fun way that should make the game a little bit more challenging for veteran players and also like forgiving for newer players. There's a mention of Firstborn and Stoneborn. I don't think that's super important. We can skip to the next point about how when you dig underground you can get gold and it can also spawn in enemies. I don't remember enemy units spawning in previous Age of Wonders games when you're clearing out the underground, but I do remember getting gold. It's a nice return to older mechanics that just thematically makes sense in that world. You're underground, you're going mining, you're going to get resources. It's interesting. It's not like gems, it's just like gold ready to go, ready to be used. But I guess that's for simplicity's sake. There's something in there about industrial people getting less food, but they can build things faster. So it's kind of like a trade-off you take if you're going to go the Materium route or go for Industrious. Um, but generally speaking, that's not a terrible trade-off unless you're playing in a really long-term game and you're going to need to have big cities to make nice stuff. Um, Next thing they kind of showed off was how if you're going to go Materium, you're going to get like wall structures in your cities, which will make it so that they're a little bit safer and harder for AI units to just knock over. I love that idea. I feel like, it's sometimes really silly and annoying how often the marauders raid your land. Some games you'll only get like one spawner near your territory and you won't have to worry about the armies that spawn in. But in other games you'll get like 4 or 5 and you'll just constantly be running your armies around trying to defend. So having those little wall structures to make those fights a little bit easier sounds awesome to me. Um, they also mentioned that growth is faster than in Planetfall, so you're going to be able to grow into the surrounding territory around your capital a little bit faster. I think that should work out pretty well. I do feel like the decision on what sector you take first is so important in Planetfall, and having you get another sector a little bit faster takes that pressure off that decision a little bit more. They did show off some of the choices that they had around the starting city and the icons that you get for that. It shows that you can build a mine in this place that you annex, or you can build like a mana node thing on the other sector to the left there. I think there's also the ability to do a research one. I think that's what the purple icon is showing. I believe this is saying that if you annex it, then you can build this, because I think special sector improvements do still need to be built in your city sector center. There's going to be, I think, draft for units and then just general production for building buildings. But I could be wrong. It could be that you take the sector, you get the mine. You take the other sector, you get the mana node, and that's what that sector does. It's still a little bit unclear to me. But I'm sure if I went back and watched the stream closely, I could pull out a little bit more information. Uh, there was something um, shown off in the fight that I thought was pretty interesting. You can restart a single player fight, or you can restart any battle if you want. If it's toggled on, you can kind of do something similar to undo movement, but instead of undoing a single movement, it takes you back to the beginning of a fight, which I think you could do through a just loading up an autosave. But now I think there's a separate button there for convenience sake, and I think that's awesome. I think that kind of stuff is going to really open up the game to newer players. And yeah, I'd love to see a couple more people out there to teach the game to. Um, they also made a pretty general tip about put your leader in danger. That's always, as far as I've been aware, been the case for a long time in Age of Wonders games. Maybe not in Age of Wonders 1 or 2, because I think if they died once, then you just lost the game. But in Age of Wonders 3 and in Planetfall, it was generally a pretty good idea to move your leader further forward so that they can take the first few hits of damage. One interesting thing they mentioned later in the stream was that your unit, your hero units or your champion units are a single unit, so they can't have reduced damage from taking damage. So for that reason, it's pretty good to have them take that alpha strike from the enemy, so long as they don't die. You don't want them to just like fall in battle on turn one, because then they haven't done anything really useful. They've only tanked a little bit for your other units, but um, you know, sometimes there's situations where they'll resurrect, or they've got like resurgence, so if they die, it's not the end of the world. You can manage. Um, Shield units are hard to kill with physical damage. They mentioned that if somebody's got like 6 armor and no resistance, you want to use magic on them, which I think a Materium dwarf type build would have. They would have a lot of physical damage and not a lot of ways to um, defend against magic. So that would be a pretty obvious counter, and that would be one reason why you wouldn't want to go all Materium. You may want to get another way to defend your units through enchantments, or maybe the tomes, or the other cultural options that you have in Age of Wonders 4. They also mentioned that we have some T5 units in Age of Wonders 4, which we'll get to when we get to the dev diary. They showed off one at the very end. They saved the best for last. I love that, like just like philosophy and structuring content. But I think that that leads to a lot of people missing this really special thing that they hid in there at the end. We're almost ready to start looking at the actual dev diary. Got a few more notes. There was something about routing. When the banners start to flash in a fight, that means a unit's getting low on morale and they're considering running away. I believe the tier 3 spider that was in that first fight was getting pretty close to running away, because all the other units had died, and that kind of puts like a negative modifier on the morale. But I don't believe that we actually did see any units running away from low morale in this stream. I could be wrong. There may have been one in the first fight. XP works like it did in Planetfall. You don't have to worry about which unit gets the killing blow. I think that's a pretty uh, logical way to do things. I think people really like the way the XP system changed in Planetfall. It just meant less micromanaging and more time on the things that you actually enjoy in Age of Wonders. We have this returning villain from Age of Wonders 3, Werlak. I believe has to be in the campaign in one way, shape, or form. I think this is a little bit of a teaser. They were, I think, a villain in Age of Wonders 3, so it's neat to see that we have these returning characters, and I don't know if they will necessarily be a villain in the new one. They may end up being like an ally that you have to work with, or like maybe they've fully redeemed themselves. Apparently, they're a strategist warlord, and um, they lead the Shadowborn elves, kind of like the Dark Elves from previous games. Uh, on this image, you can see these little swords in front of the dragon, indicating which hexes he would retaliate from. So if you get behind him and attack, he won't attack your units back, which is what this dwarven unit ended up doing. It's a pretty nice UI indicator that I don't believe was in Planetfall. You could get behind and flank and not get hit by retaliation, but there was no indication that space was actually safe to you. And with the amount of melee units I'm expecting in Age of Wonders 4, I think this kind of indication before your units get into place is going to be really helpful. I think you could have moved it into place and then right before attacking, it's like, oh, you're in danger. You're going to get an overwatch. But um, at that point, it might be a little bit too late. Somebody may have clicked attack like before moving. That's something I think a lot of people do. But moving and then checking your attack is a smart way to kind of like weigh your options. Yeah, here's the thing about heroes being a single unit. Sundering defense works kind of like removing armor or removing shields in Planetfall, and it counteracts bolstering defense, which increases armor. I think the dragon had bolstered defense, and then some of the dwarven units had the ability to remove defense. So it was neat to see how those things interact with each other. They counteract each other. Yeah, just counter each other. So ranged units, this was shown up towards the end. They cannot attack things that are right next to them. I believe that's all of the like ranged units, maybe all of the, not necessarily all the magic units, but like your traditional archer or crossbow units have to not be adjacent to what they're attacking, I believe, or not adjacent to anything that's got them in like a melee Overwatch type situation. So they have to move away, and then they can attack using their ranged attacks. That's everything I had from just like my screenshots from the actual stream. Really fun to watch. Glad that they shared that with everyone. Um, a lot of the things in here is going to be highlighting a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about, so I may just skip past one or two of these things. There's this Anvil Guard, which has the bolstering passive that, and this unit came from the Industrious pick that they took at the very beginning here, the culture. Um, this is that thing that we were just talking about that can be is kind of like the opposite of sundering defense. It seems like a main gimmick of this culture that's supposed to be very similar to dwarves, but could be applied to different forms. Um, it helps with resisting physical damage, but not magical damage. So this is like really good if you're fighting other people who've taken the industrial trait, but less so if they are maybe a wizard or they've gone some kind of magical route. Like the mystic culture, I think, would be one that would counter the industrious path pretty well. The Arbalest needs to move. Oh, she can't move. Yes. Her main strength comes from her overdraw attack, which she can only use if she hasn't moved, and that means playing defensively with this unit is a pretty good plan. You want to sit back and wait for the enemy to approach you, maybe waste an attack and come out of defensive mode so that when you attack, it's easier to do a lot of damage. Sometimes it's better to just get good positioning, let them have a really wimpy alpha strike where they're not using their action points very effectively, so that they get closer and on your next turn you're going to be able to do a lot of damage. I think that the Arbalest is going to be one of those units that specializes in that kind of turtling up, finding a good position and letting somebody get a pretty terrible attack on you so that you can come back with a better attack. The Steelshaper is interesting because unlike a lot of healers, they don't do magic damage, they actually do physical damage. And they can heal other units by turning their bolster defense into HP, which is interesting. Because then that unit will be able to take more damage. So it's going to be like you got to weigh your options, make sure that it actually is optimal to take the defense off of them. There may be another way to heal them that you've got through other units or enchantments. So you got to keep that all in mind when you got your support unit, the Steelshaper here. Um, Next, we have this Halberd, which is a polearm. I believe a lot of the polearms get special damage against big units. I actually didn't see that in the list of modifiers here on the right, but I think they mentioned that in the stream that they get bonus damage to like giants and dragons because of the extra reach on that polearm. And they typically help out with the shield wall. They're going to be the guys who do a little bit of damage behind the shield wall. So it's nice to have a few of them in your army, specifically if you think you might be running into some cavalry. Um, this one didn't actually get built in the stream. The Bastion replaces the Anvil Guard and gets the ability to taunt, which I think means that when they catch somebody in that taunt, then they have to waste their turn running towards them instead of attacking other units. And maybe that means you take one attack from an enemy, but usually that's on a unit that can take the damage, somebody who's got lots of defense, and like you're not gonna taunt a unit that can do magical damage when you can't defend against magical damage. You're gonna end up picking something that it makes the most sense. Unlike your enemy, uh, rather, it makes the most sense for you, and your enemy can't make the decision that's going to be most optimal for them. There's this Steel Fury chant, which seems pretty interesting. It takes your bolstered defenses, which I think you can only get one of um, from just being hit, and you can get like one from the Steelshaper and one from other different uh, like paths in over each turn. I think you may be able to get more than one bolster defense each turn, and then each of those stacks can be consumed using this uh, operation, this spell, to get some strength, increasing your damage, and to get some fortune, increasing your crit chance. I think fortune is similar to getting extra morale, but it doesn't counteract negative morale. It just increases your ability to get crit chance, which is super powerful in Age of Wonders Planetfall kind of worked like advantage. It would roll your crit chance first, and if that succeeded, it didn't even look at your attack roll. Then you just do like full damage times 1.5, and it was pretty good. Now we have a couple things about forms and traits. This is what I mentioned earlier about how you can get +2 defense on all of your units if you're gonna go for this tough trait, the typical like dwarf trait. And if you felt like switching out to be more like physical defense, you could go for resilient. That's what I think Tom ended up doing in this stream. And after that, we have our mind traits. You know, you have your body traits. There's one option here for body, and then there's one option for mind. And you know, your typical dwarven trait would be dwarven tactics, getting extra defense, kind of like Swarm Shield in Age of Wonders Planetfall. Um, but Tom went for something else. He went for underground adaptation, making it so that he could get a powerful economic bonus, allowing the units to excavate the ground around them to get the gold and maybe spawn in units for experience. It's not necessarily always a bad thing to spawn in units. If you can keep all of your units alive, then it's experience, and that can be really, really good. After that, we have some society traits. This one's talking about how quarries can give you +2 gold. Makes it cheaper to get your improvements, which was super powerful in Planetfall. Getting -50% production is massive. I think you could get -20% from an Empire quest and -20% from a Doctrine in Planetfall. So this is kind of like two of the best building modifiers that you can get all packaged into one. Of course, you have to pick it at the beginning of the game, and that means you won't be able to get some of the other fun toys to play with. But that's a massive bonus. It should make your cities pretty interesting. And if you got good cities, you should be able to build big and strong armies to go with them. Um, Runesmiths is interesting because it makes it so that you can do more enchantments, and you get, I think, an extra protective unit or the polearm unit. So extra units is always good for momentum. I think I would probably end up considering this. A nice thing about the reduced upkeep is that that is usually one of the bigger limiting factors on how many units you can end up supporting. If you are only making 1 mana a turn, then you may have too many magical units. If you are only making 1 gold a turn, you may have too many like typical physical units, and you may want to start looking into using your other resources or increasing your economy. One way or another, you're going to need to increase your upkeep to a more typical number. After that, I think we have, yeah, Tomes of Magic, which goes over a few things like how you can get Sundering Blades, uh, Tempered Shields. My favorite one from this list is Seeker's Arrows. Apparently, a lot of players go for this tome just for that enchantment because you can get extra 1 range on all of your archer units. Apparently, this doesn't apply to support units and battle mage units. It only applies to units with that range tag, and I have to assume because if it did apply to other things, it would be too powerful, and they wanted to give +1 range to these units to make them more viable in the long term. They probably dropped off at a certain point, and this just kind of makes them more competitive into the late game. We talked about this one earlier, the little summon. He's pretty powerful compared to some of the other units that we saw. Like, for example, this is a tier 2, so let's go to a tier 1. This is a tier 1 unit. It's only got 45 HP and none of these other little armor or resistance bonuses. So when you compare this thing that you can build to this thing that you can summon, the summons are just better. They are going to be pretty expensive, I believe. But I think I'm going to probably be relying on the summoned units quite a bit, which is a shame because I wanted to be more of a champion than a wizard. But maybe I can be something in between. Um, Awakened Tools is something also pretty similar to something we see in Planetfall, where you can make your cities less effective or less happy, which is generally a bad thing. They might revolt, but it'll make it so that you can build things better. This is going to be better in smaller cities who don't have as much draw on their stability just from the population. But at a certain point, just getting that extra 20 production, extra 20 draft isn't going to be worth losing 20 stability. So it's an interesting thing to have in there for the early game, but eventually you're going to need to drop that off. And I guess if you're growing some of your cities in the late game, you may put it on for a turn or two just to build a few things like maybe landmark improvements or things that make your units that you build a little bit better, just so you can get that 1 or 2 turns earlier. This next thing is the Rune Carver's Camp. This will give you plus 15 draft to a city and an additional 3 mana for each quarry. If you are going for a magic heavy build, this seems pretty useful. I like that you can kind of lean in certain directions or balance it out so that you've got options, because that will lead to a couple strategies actually developing. There won't be, I think, necessarily one meta immediately. People will like maybe go all in one thing or all in another thing, and that will work out when you're dealing with most builds. But every once in a while, you may end up dealing with somebody who can counter that just perfectly with their balance build. Now, Empire mode shows off a few things here, like some of the bonuses you can get. There's some good ones in here, like you just get plus 5 gold from each of your special improvements. So your cities are going to create more income, allowing you to have more armies, or there's other things I think you can spend gold on other than armies. I was going to say operations, but no, gold isn't what you use for magic. That's mana. Um, what I find really interesting at the end here is this unit. The Golden Golem is supposed to be the most powerful polearm in the game, and it's capable of being like King Midas. It can turn units into gold when it attacks them. It's got a golden curse, and I assume that at the end of the fight you actually get some gold, like a little bit of gold income, because that was something that you could do in Planetfall. You could get like +4 gold for every tier 1 unit that you killed. So I could totally see this actually translating into a small economic bonus. Not the like main reason why you would want to apply the golden curse. Obviously, turning a unit into gold, it just like kills him instantly. But I like how that could thematically increase the gold in your coffers. It sounds like a fun little like tweak on other insta kill type situations that I've seen before. I don't believe I've seen a golden curse that just turns people into gold in Age of Wonders games. But if anybody has and wants to let me know in the comments below, please feel free to. Um, I think that's all of the highlights from this week. I'm looking forward to next week where we're going to be talking about narrative events. Until then, have a good one.